Energy policy in this nation seems to veer from the mad to the obscene. Clearly having had enough of the flack associated with the decision to dump the Commonwealth Games, Victorian Premier Dan Andrews has now decided to ban gas stoves in homes, as though the clean, abundant and effective natural gas we have is some kind of dirty pollutant. He didn't seem to mind them in 2020 when he tweeted this photo of himself. But hey, I guess times change. Here's what Planning Minister Sonia Kilkenny said on Friday about it.
And it will certainly help for Victoria to achieve its energy emissions targets and help us achieve net zero in 2045.
This stuff is just madness. It really is time for some perspective in climate policy. China has emitted more carbon dioxide over the past 8 years than the UK has since, wait for it, the start of the Industrial Revolution. Think about that for a moment. Now, some would like to pretend these are just the rantings of another right-winger arguing we shouldn't do our bit. But far from it. This is the point that's being made by none other than Tony Blair, former Labor Prime Minister in the UK. He recently said to New Statesman, "Don't ask us to do a huge amount when, frankly, whatever we do in Britain is not really going to impact climate change." The number one issue today, and this is where Britain could play a part, is how do you finance the energy transition? Because basically, the developed world's emissions are going down, but the developing world's are going up. These countries have got to grow, so how do you finance a transition? Secondly, how do you accelerate the technology? That's the end of the quote, but he's right. The economic suicide of the West will not make a jot of difference to climate change. And that's assuming you accept the notion hook, line and sinker. Australia's about 1% of global emissions is just a drop in the proverbial ocean. Our contribution, the way we can make a real difference, is by using our educated populations and our research capacity to develop the technologies that will make the life we choose to lead more and more sustainable. Now, this represents a big change in perspective from the former UK Prime Minister. I mean, it was the Blair government that really started the UK's push down this path. But I'm also prepared to respect a person who's prepared to change course and grapple with the facts as they understand them now. Now, I believe it is incontrovertibly the case that a rapid push to net zero robs the most needy people of this planet, including the poor in our own backyard, of the essentials of life. What do I mean by that? You know, the heating that literally saves lives during the winter, particularly among the very young and very old. Or the clean cooking fuels like gas that save the lives of women and girls in the developing world who are currently too often poisoned from the fumes of cooking on substandard fuels. They would give it all to have our clean natural gas with which to cook. It denies the affordable energy that lifts people out of menial labour consuming their days and opens up their capacity to use their intellect and their creativity in ways that are simply not possible without affordable, reliable energy. And that really is what makes the difference in helping to lift people up on the ladder of life. Now, this is something that Bjorn Lomborg has been saying for quite a while. Check it out.
So the reality here is, again, yes, global warming is a problem, but trying to solve it by saying, would you mind being a little poorer, a little colder, a little less comfortable, not being able to drive your car? That's never going to work. What is going to work, and the only thing that's going to work, is innovation.
And it's time to get real here. We shouldn't be calling solar and wind energy renewable or even green. Now, sure, sunlight and wind are abundant natural resources that we will never be without, but solar panels and wind turbines, well, they're a different thing entirely, and they are anything but. The rare earth minerals needed to make a solar panel require mining in abundance and some of the most harsh mineral processing on the planet. And wind turbines, with their massive size and non-recyclable materials, well, they're not renewable either. Both have really short lifespans that mean the environmental damage of their manufacture and the environmental harm of their disposal are arguably worse than the benefit they provide. So let's stop calling them green, because they're not actually renewable. And when we think of the subsidies they've required here in Australia and the 18,000 kilometres of transmission lines that will be required at a cost to the public in the tens of billions, well, they're not cheap energy either. And when the clouds come over or the wind dies down, well, it's also not reliable. So there's an important moral narrative here about doing what's right for our planet and for the world's most needy. And it lies in acknowledging we all have a right to climb the ladder of energy production, and that the fact is, as people get richer, they also move to cleaner technologies. The left like to talk a lot about climate justice. Well, you know what? I think it's time we started talking about energy justice. It's to acknowledge that only a hypocrite would talk about a climate emergency whilst opposing nuclear energy as a technology that sits at the top of the cleanliness ladder. It makes no sense to have an energy minister who's going around talking like this.
The most expensive form of energy and the slowest to roll out, nuclear. You know, the only thing small about a small modular reactor is the output. Nothing small about the cost.
Got his head in the sand. And finally, it is to observe that while there are lots of good reasons to continually improve our energy production methods, there are environmental emergencies that are much more serious, much more close to home, and much more urgent than anything that is going on with our climate. So let's start being honest about the trade-offs here. When Australians get asked about whether they want climate action now, like they have on the little signs that lefties put in their front yards, well, Australians say yes. But their preparedness to pay for it, and right now the capacity of many people to do so, is low. Freshwater Strategy did the research, and $20 a month is what most people are prepared to pay for this grand climate action now. It's not much. Their appetite for climate action extends to the value of one coffee a week. But what Australians are getting in that request is radical and extreme and enormously expensive. It's about the worst thing we could do to people who are poor, here and globally. So let's do what we can to reasonably limit emissions, but not at the cost of destroying jobs, not at the cost of driving industries offshore or putting massive pressure on the cost of living. And let's do the right thing now, which is to deal with the actual environmental emergencies we face, like habitat destruction and land, water and air degradation. And as it turns out, it is technology in agriculture, in industrial processes and generally, that is the solution there too. We don't have to go back to the dark ages, go back to living in caves to do the right thing by the environment. But our single-minded obsession with so-called climate action is actually harming the most needy people and the planet.